We all heard about online, and you'll see that it's growing pretty rapidly. And I think, do all of you have online courses? See? Well, it's a good thing, because my sense is if you're not online now, you're going to have to be, and it's going to have to be big time, because this is just against me. It's going too fast. Anyway, the online learning, you're going to have to be into it. It's going to be required. There are two reasons for it. One, the millennials really like flexibility. But the second reason that I see is these kids are going to learn through online learning after they get out. And you ought to help them be prepared for that. It's just what you owe your students as they graduate. Technology, we all know a lot of this numbers. As you can see, it is huge. And remember, these are first graders already admired in this stuff. So who knows what's going to be another 13 years or whatever it is they get out. But it's definitely going to be a major issue. And I think many of us are not particularly prepared for it. We did a survey for the Chronicle with the Association of Physical Plant Administrators. We asked them to predict various things in terms of how they're going to, what kinds of things do they foresee in the future. And one of the interesting things, and it's a little disconcerting, is the public seem much more ready to adopt new kinds of teaching and methods than the privates are. Now, the private's a little higher on virtual simulations, but when you really get down to it, the public is higher on that if you put likely and very likely together. Throughout this whole study, one of the things that came out is that privates are much less adventurous in technology. Part of it's not as much money, I assume. It's something to do. But it's also one of those things that I think you can get caught up and lose badly if you're not preparing, using the technology that's already available and being ready for the new. One of the interesting things, though, and this didn't come as a surprise to me, but it shows you where the private colleges are staking their claim. And that's we asked about collaborative spaces. What kind of spaces do you think will be needed? And the private, obviously, were higher than the public significantly. And that's because that's what we do. We are in collaborative, close working with faculty and so on and so forth. So that's one of your advantages, and one of the things you've got to keep talking about is collaborative learning. That is probably the hottest term I saw when putting this together, is collaborative teaching, learning, so on and so forth. Another term which is interesting is bundling. If you looked at Inside Higher Education this morning, the feds are looking at credit hours. What determines a credit hour? What makes it up? Where do you get it? And bundling basically says you're going to have you're going to have to take credits from all sorts of areas, including for-profits, but also you're going to have from corporate training and so on and so forth. And I've got one school big on bundling at this point, working on it anyway. And it's a nightmare, but I think they're going to be ahead of the game by knowing how to bundle. Now, what that does, I did that again. This doesn't like me. Not that I'm paranoid. I grew up in the Netherlands in 1921. I grew up in a can of mixed nuts. But anyway, the projection is we're all going to have to be doing more of this, more partnering, more working with others, and so on and so forth. Or we're just going to be way behind when it gets to it. We're so fussy about credits already, which I don't blame you for. But the advanced placement of 5 to accept for credit versus 4, is it worth it? Another projection is basically college not as a on-campus event anymore. Now, that means a lot to, what does that mean to your athletics? What does it mean to your student activities? What does it mean to a lot of things? But it's going to be a possibility that kids can go for 2 days a week, take the rest online, do it in some other way, go to another institution, and so on. And I think we have to keep that in mind, because that could become your competition. I'm not saying you should compete on the same line they should, but you've got to keep in mind that's going to be part of your competition.
George, can I just interject? I'd argue that we're doing that already in how we offer our courses, because students work really hard to try and get their courses only on 2 or 3 days a week. And even our residential students. And it's possible, and that's the piece that we have control over that we're not controlling, is that it's possible for students to do that and still be living on campus and just not in those learning spaces that we think are the learning spaces.
Well, and I think
so
that's...
it's not 25 years from now.
No.
Yeah. It's scary.
Well, it's scary. It's also the reality. Part of it has to do with this work thing, because a lot of them have to work. And so
Right.
I have schools that, for some reason, wonder why their kids drink on Thursday nights when they don't have class on Friday. Duh. And I don't know why schools do that. I think one of the worst things we did is stop having Saturday classes.
It's convenience. You know, it's convenience from the flip side.
Yeah.
It's convenient for us.
Yeah.
It's
Oh yeah, convenience is one of the big things with higher education, not necessarily for the students.
And some of the faculty only want to teach 2 days a week, just not some of the students want.
And why wouldn't you? But the fact is that what you owe the kids? And I think that's one of the real risks we take, is that we do things for the convenience of our faculty and staff, and not necessarily for the convenience of students. But the millennials aren't going to put up with that. Not for long. They're going to hammer you. And so I think you have to be a little bit careful about that. And I also, and that gets back to your value added. If you're at 3-day-a-week college, are you worth paying for 7 days?
Right.
I don't think so. Here's some good news you'll be happy to know. I knew I was going to find it. This is an interesting thing in the fact that, and I've read a lot about this just happened to be the quote that came out, is we need to be with other people. We need to learn from other people and with other people, which leads into the whole value of the residential college, which to me is what really separates your kind of institutions from the big universities and so on and so forth. That the residential experience is a total learning experience. And I firmly believe you should figure out ways to acknowledge, reward, recognize learning in all its iterations in terms of on campus, off campus, in class, out of class, and say that we're learning. For instance, leadership. Leadership can be learned in a class, but it's also often learned and so on and so forth. But how do you recognize that? It's a little like the liberal arts. We just assume an 18-year-old knows what it means. I can guarantee you less than 10% know what a liberal arts education is of our 30,000 we survey. And that's because we talk about it as if it's a thing rather than an outcome. And what the kids want are outcomes. I couldn't care less how you get it particularly, but you got to have the outcome. And I think this is where residential schools become total learning experiences, that they really learn how to recognize the on-campus life, on-campus learning, and so on and so forth. It's the same with the job thing in my mind. You've got to figure out how to work with them, because if you don't, you get swept up by low-cost competitors.
Well, that's